Okay, and again, I'm glad you're here today. I want to talk about Israel simply because Israel's in the news every day, all day, and it's affecting our country. As you well know, there are demonstrations all over America. There was a large march on Washington this weekend, pro-Israel, which is good news because most of the demonstrations, even though there may have been a small pocket of pro-Jewish people in that area, the overwhelming majority were supporting the Palestinians. And so, again, I'm very clear up front because I believe the Bible and I believe the Abrahamic covenant is still in effect. I believe that we must support Israel. Now, that does not mean that I agree with everything that Israel does. I don't even agree with myself sometimes. So, but remember, Israel is back in her land, but Israel is not saved. In the last days, there are two returns. The return to the land that began in the 1880s with the Zionist movement and has happened on every year since then. And still, even today, people are immigrating to Israel on a yearly basis. But there's another return, and it's a return to the Lord. And that's when Israel will be saved. And in my notes, I talk about what Israel must do before the second coming. And on the last 3 days of the tribulation period, Israel will realize, Hosea chapter 6, that they have missed the Messiah and that their national problems that they've had for all of these millennia have been because they rejected Jesus as their Messiah. The 2 days before the second coming, they will realize that Jesus really is the Messiah, and that's what Isaiah chapter 53 is all about. If you read it in its context, it's Israel acknowledging that Jesus is the Messiah. And then finally, we find in Zechariah chapter 12 that Israel will call out. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew 23, "You will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" And on that day, the last day of the tribulation period, they will cry out, "Blessed is he, Jesus Christ, who came in the name of Yahweh," the personal name of God in the Old Testament. Then the second coming will happen. But it cannot happen until Israel repents, trusts Christ, and cries out for Christ to come back. It cannot happen. The scriptures are very, very clear about that. So there's two returns. The return to their land, they're in unbelief. In one of the lessons, I talk about really the spirituality or the lack of it in Israel. Basically 10% of Jews today living in the land of Israel attend synagogue, only 10%. And they are secular people like the United States. Back when I was growing up, most people went to church. All of the churches in my small community had 400 to 600 people every Sunday, and we had just 3,000, a little less than 3,000 people in our community. And so we had about 5 or 6 churches, and that's all but about 500 people living in the community went to church on Sunday on average. But that's not that way in America today. We're a secular society, and Israel is also. Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the prime minister of Israel, I'm not even sure if he really believes in God. He is a very secular individual. His autobiography, he takes credit for everything that God has done to preserve Israel since she became a nation on May 14th, 1948. He takes credit for all the miracles of God, that it wasn't God who did those, that it was the Israeli people who did those things. And so I just don't even know how deeply he really believes in the existence of God. But all of the leaders of Israel, the prime ministers, have been seculars. They've not been Jewish in the sense of they're practicing the Jewish religion with any consistency. So I don't agree with everything Israel does, but I will support Israel. I will back Israel because of some things I'm about to say. Now, the Bible that we hold dear, we read from on a daily basis, we hear it taught, preached, whatever, on a regular basis. The Bible is a book about Israel. It begins with in Genesis chapter 12 with the calling of Abraham out of a land of idolatry. The book of Joshua tells us that Abraham's father made his living by making idol gods with his hands, carving them, and so forth. So Abraham came out of a pagan background, and God appeared to him and called Abraham, and Abraham obeyed God and went to a land that God showed him. Abraham didn't know where he was going. He was walking by faith. God, I'll follow you. You show me. And God did that particular thing. And it's out of the lineage of Abraham that the Jewish nation traces its roots. As I often say, I don't know who the first Englishman was, and neither do you. I don't know who the first American was, and neither do you. I don't know who the first Frenchman was, and neither do you. But I do know who the first Jew was, and it was Abraham. He was the father of the Jewish race. That is why Abraham is revered in Judaism, because he is the father of their race. So, we know the Bible is a book about Israel. In the Old Testament, we have Israel's history, the events that happened in the past. But also we have Israel's future. Prophetic events are mentioned in the Old Testament. And, of course, in the New Testament, there are references back to the Old Testament history. There are also references to the future of Israel. In the New Testament, it is a book about Israel. It's talking about Jesus Christ, who is the spiritual descendant of Abraham. You remember that God promised Abraham in Genesis 12, and it's interpreted in Galatians 3, that Jesus Christ is the seed of Abraham, the spiritual seed of Abraham, by which all nations will be blessed. And so, again, Christ was a Jew by race. And so in the New Testament, we have the story of God bringing salvation through two obedient young people. Mary was probably somewhere between 12 and 14, and Joseph was probably 8 to 10 years older than she was. And it was through these two godly Jewish people that we had, of course, the miraculous conception of Christ by the Holy Spirit, and Christ was raised in a very godly home with godly parents. And so our spiritual roots go back to Judaism. And so it's just really hard to read the Bible, to believe the Bible, to teach the Bible, and not spend an inordinate amount of time talking about Israel, because Israel is the subject. Now, I'm going to read some verses today. I have hundreds of verses. You guys who read my notes know they are filled with scriptures, because I teach the Bible. It's not my thoughts, my opinions. I try to teach the Bible. In Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 6, God is, and let me just say this about the book of Deuteronomy. God has told Moses that he will not be able to enter the promised land because he had sinned. Now, he got to see the promised land, but he did not get to enter the promised land. And we know that he died, and God buried him there on Mount Pisgah in today's Jordan. It's on the eastern side of the Dead Sea, the Jordan River. And so the book of Deuteronomy is actually the three last sermons that Moses preached to his people before he died. So it's really three sermons. And in those sermons, Moses reminds the people of what is important. Now, if you've been around a loved one who's dying, you don't talk about the weather. You don't talk about the price of eggs in India. You talk about important things. And when Moses was ready to die, he talked about important things. And so I'll quote from Deuteronomy about 4 or 5 times in the opening here. And these are the things that God is saying through Moses, the prophet, to his people. Deuteronomy 7:6. For you, meaning Israel, are a people holy to the Lord, holy to Yahweh your God. The Lord your God has chosen you, Israel, out of among all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his. Now, if I didn't read any more than that, you and I should walk away and saying, God said, these people are my people. The children of Israel are my people. And he goes on and he adds a little descriptive phrase here. He said, you are his treasured possession. Now, we all know what a treasure is, right? A treasure can be anything that's valuable. And when God said to Israel that you are my treasured possession, he is saying to them, you are very valuable to me. And so they are valued above all the people on the face of the earth because God chose them. So it's not Jeff saying that we should, support Israel, stand with Israel. It's God saying, hey, of all the people on the face of the earth, I chose you because you are my treasured, precious, valuable possession. And so that's what God is saying through Moses, and we need to remember that and never forget that. Now, we find in Deuteronomy 7:6, it seems like I missed a scripture somewhere here. Maybe not. I guess not. Deuteronomy 7:6, for you, the children of Israel, are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord has chosen you out of all the people. So again, he's saying that. Deuteronomy 14:2, for you, the children of Israel, are a people holy to the Lord your God. Out of all the peoples on the face of the earth, the Lord has chosen you. So he keeps repeating himself. Why does God keep repeating himself? Because this is important. He does not want them to forget, and he doesn't want us to forget that these are God's special people. Now, why did God choose the Jews? That is a great mystery. It's so much so that one theologian said, how odd of God to choose the Jew. And there is no reason why. Listen to what God said, or Moses wrote these words. He said, the Lord did not set his affection on you, meaning the children of Israel, and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples. God didn't choose you because you were big. He goes on, for you were the fewest of all peoples. So God didn't say, well, they're a big nation and I can use a big nation with a lot of people, and more people means more skills and more skilled people to do something for me. No. He says, you were actually the fewest of people. Now, I tell people from time to time in messages, if you can think of any reason God saved you, then you do not understand the grace of God and the depravity of man. God didn't choose me or you because we could sing, and he needs singers. He didn't choose us because we're good teachers, although some of you are very good teachers. He didn't choose you because you had money that you could give, and God needs your money. No. God has saved us by his grace. Charis, the Greek word means unmerited favor, giving to the undeserving. The root of charis is gift. And you know what? A gift is something somebody gives you because they love you. Not they don't expect anything in return. They just, out of their generosity and love, they give you a gift. That's what salvation is. It's God's love gift to the human race. Now, grace is unmerited. You can't earn it. And that's what's sad, because all of the religions of the world teach you have to work your way to heaven or paradise or whatever kind of name they have for their eternal dwelling place where they think they're going. No. The Bible teaches that we cannot earn it. It is unearnable. It is unmerited. You don't deserve it. That's what I mean by unmerited. You don't deserve it. I don't deserve it. The Bible is clear about that. New Testament just talks about grace over and over. And a matter of fact, my favorite word other than a proper noun in the English language is the word grace. And I used to use it as password for all of my accounts. That was before we had to get sophisticated and have uppercase, lowercase symbols, numbers, and it had to be about that long, you know. But in the olden days, 5 letters grace, because to me that's the most important word other than a proper name, which would be Christ or God or Holy Spirit or my wife or my son or whatever. You know what I'm saying? That's how much I value grace. Secondly, we don't understand the depravity of man, because the depravity teaches us that we are sinners in the womb. David said, you know, that he was conceived in iniquity, from the moment of conception. And that he also said that we come out of the womb speaking lies. So you don't have to teach children how to lie. You don't have to teach people how to sin. I mean, I didn't take a class in college called Sinning 101 because I already had a PhD in sinning by the time I made it to college. You know, it just comes natural. It's our nature. It's easy as falling off the log, as the old timers used to say. And so on and so forth. We know that we are sinners. And, you know, and the Bible teaches that we're born with a sin nature that is inclined to do evil. It's bent, according to one Hebrew word. We're bent. Our nature is bent. We're not straight. We're bent. We're crooked is another word that is used in the Old Testament. So, anyway, God didn't choose Israel because they were big. God didn't choose us because he needed something we could do for him. Deuteronomy 28, 9 and 10. Deuteronomy 28, 9 and 10. The Lord will establish you, the children of Israel, as his holy people, as he promised you on oath. God swore, he made an oath that Israel would be his people forever. If you keep the commands of the Lord your God and walk in your ways, then all peoples on earth will see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they will fear you. Can you go push that air conditioner up so it'll quit running, make it warmer in here? I've got people who are cold, meaning me. 2 Samuel 7:23. 2 Samuel 7:23. And who is like your people Israel, the one nation on earth that God went out to redeem as a people for himself? God says Israel is one nation, and it is head and shoulders above the others. And to make a name for himself and to perform great and awesome wonders by driving out nations and their gods from before your people, whom you redeemed from Egypt. You have established your people as your very own, and here's the $2 word, forever. God says he's established his people forever. Now, forever means forever. The Greek, this is of course from the Hebrew Old Testament, but in the Greek, the word Hebrew, in the Greek word forever means forever and ever and ever and ever. And you could say forever, forever, and still not exhaust the meaning of the term. It means it just goes on forever. So God said that he chose Israel forever to be his people. Now that's the teaching of the Bible. And I don't care what culture says. I don't care what any other religion says. I'm telling you, the Bible says God chose Israel to be his people forever. And that's very important. We need to remember that. In the last lesson that we had, I talked about Psalm 83. And Psalm 83 talks about the enemies of Israel, and they are the Arab nations. And the nations today that we call Arab nations in the Middle East, all of those nations had descended from Ishmael. We'll talk about Isaac and Ishmael a little bit. From Ishmael, and they are clamoring after God's land that he gave to the children of Israel. So I'll read it again. Psalm 83:1. O God, don't sit idly by, silent and inactive. Have you ever prayed that, said that to God? I have. I said, God, come on. Come on, God. I don't know that you're hearing me today. I need you, God. Come on. I've done that. Don't you hear the tumult of your enemies, God? They're making a lot of noise. Don't you see what your arrogant enemies are doing? They, meaning these Arab nations he's about to mention, devise crafty schemes against your people Israel, laying plans against your precious ones. Come, they say, let us wipe out Israel as a nation. Does that sound familiar? You've been hearing the chants, from the river to the sea, from the river to the sea. What that means is, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, they're going to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth. You know, we just thought Adolf Hitler was dead. He's not dead. He's alive and well today through his hatred of the Jewish people. It's still alive and well today. We call it anti-Semitism. Anti means against. Semitism goes back to the son of Noah, Shem. Remember the three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth? Shem, that name, Shemites became Semites over time. And so it's God's people, the Jews. Come, they say, let us wipe out Israel as a nation. We will destroy the very memory of its existence. This was their unanimous decision. Man, if that's not as current as the morning, well, I guess we'll say morning newspaper, but we don't read newspapers anymore as a whole, but as the morning news on television. They signed a treaty as allies against you, God. And then he mentions them. The Edomites are descendants of Esau. The Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael. The Moabites are descendants of Moab by Lot's oldest daughter. And the Hagarites were descendants of Hagar. The Gebalites, which are Lebanese. The Ammonites are the descendants of Lot's youngest daughter. The Amalekites, those were the descendants of Esau. People from Philistia, that's the Philistines, and that's the Gaza Strip area. Okay. And Tyre. Tyre's in southern Lebanon on the coast of the Mediterranean. Assyria, meaning the Syrians, has joined them too. Is this not current? And it was written 3,000 years ago. Okay, so he goes on and he says, the descendants of Lot, which are the Moabites and the Ammonites, and they settled on the eastern shore of the Jordan River from Jericho northward. Okay, let me see here. I lost my place. Do to them, God, this a prayer as you did to the Midianites. That's Judges chapter 6 and following. Or as you did to Sisera. That was the commander of Jabin's army in Judges chapter 4. And Jabin, who was a king of Canaan, also in Judges chapter 4. They were destroyed at Endor, and their decaying corpses fertilized the soil. Let all their princes die, for they said, now this is what these people said, these enemies of God, let us seize for our own use the pasture lands of God. And that's what the Arabs have been saying for a while. Now, this goes back with the Palestinians. And the Palestinians are, as I say often, they're not choir boys. They are very evil people. As a matter of fact, they are so evil that they got kicked out of Jordan in 1970. And the king of Jordan sent his troops to literally force them out of the land because these Palestinians were so evil. Well, they migrated up to Lebanon on the northern border of Israel, and in 1982 they got kicked out of Israel, but Lebanon, and when they did, they left behind 100,000 impregnated Lebanese women. Evil people. Then they went down to Kuwait, and they got kicked out of Kuwait too because they are so evil. Now, they did a little creative thinking, and they said, okay, our Arab brothers all hate us. So who do our brothers hate more than they hate us? Aha! They hate Israel. So let's tell the world that Israel has stolen our land. And that was the lie. And that began, and I trace all of this here in the notes. This is how it got started with giving the Palestinians land. It started with that particular thought. And the Israelis, under world pressure from the UN, from the United States, from other nations, all kinds of other nations, to give the Palestinians a homeland. That's how they ended up in Gaza. That's why they're there today. Then, America, our presidents, and I talk about this in the message on As America's Done to Israel. I name names and tell you what they said and what they did. And so America began to pressure Israel to trade land for peace. We need this two-state solution to the Middle East problem. Two-state, Israel, Palestine, side by side. And even Israel has tried to get along with them, but you can't make deals with the devil. And so these people, they've never kept the promises they made. They've signed peace agreements. The Palestinians have never kept one of them. And yet the world keeps pressuring Israel to give them more land. And that's where the West Bank came from. And the West Bank starts in southern Israel and comes up and includes Bethlehem. And Bethlehem's 5 or 6 miles from Jerusalem. They've grown together today. But it comes and it goes across to the east. It goes up north of the Dead Sea along the Jordan River up to Jericho. And then it goes around the north side of Jerusalem and covers the middle area that in Bible times we call Samaria. And that land is the West Bank. And that's where the Palestinians are living also. And so Israel has created a real problem for themselves by listening to the world, by giving away their land, that their land, a lot of it's indefensible. I mean, in one place, their land is 7 miles wide. You cannot defend that against an enemy. He'll run you over before you even have a chance to get in your vehicle. And so that's what's been going on, all of this pressure. And a lot of it's come from America. And I'll tell you why. It's because we understand that the man who solves the Middle East crisis will be written about very, very favorably in history. And, I know going back to at least Richard Nixon, you remember his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, was flying to the Middle East every week, every other week, whatever. It was just like he was on the plane all of his life there, trying to negotiate peace in the Middle East. So Richard Nixon could be written in history as the man who did it. Did it work? Nope. And then, we move through the men. You got Ford, and you got Carter, and you got Reagan, and you got Bill Clinton, and you got H.W. Bush, and you got George W. Bush, and you got Obama, and they've all tried to do it to solve the Middle East problem by forcing Israel to sign these agreements, giving away all of this stuff, and then nobody holding the Palestinians accountable. They just never fulfilled what they said they were going to do because everybody wants to be the man who solves the Middle East crisis. Well, I'm going to tell you who's going to solve it. It's the Antichrist. He's the only one that's going to be able to solve it. That's why the Bible describes the Antichrist in these words, that he's a man of peace. Who can make war with him? I mean, this guy just solved the greatest conflict enduring conflict in world history. How can we speak evil against this man? He's done this great thing. In Daniel 9, chapter 9, verses 26 and 27, says that he is going to make a 7-year peace treaty to protect, guaranteeing the borders of Israel from all of her enemies. And every day we are moving closer to that treaty. The rapture will happen before that treaty. So if we're getting closer to the world clamoring for peace in the Middle East and someone to solve it, the closer we get when we're hearing those kind of things, the closer we are to the rapture. So, what about the land? God says that he is going to judge the Arabs because of what they have done to his land. Listen to this. Joel chapter 3, verse 2. If you know anything about Joel, Joel speaks a lot about the tribulation period and even some events further along in prophecy. But listen to what Joel chapter 3 says. He's talking about a judgment here at the end. And he says in Joel 3:2, I, meaning Yahweh, will gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. That's a valley there in Jerusalem. It's on the eastern and southern sides of the city of Jerusalem. There, meaning in the valley of Jehoshaphat, I, Yahweh, will enter into my judgment against them as all nations. And here's what he's going to judge them for. Concerning my inheritance, my people Israel, for they scattered my people among the nations and divided up my land. This is such a serious thing, to steal God's land from God's people, that God is going to judge all nations for stealing what did not belong to them. So it's a pretty important thing, folks, for Israel to be in that land. But the good news is, we learned from the scriptures, God said that once he puts the children of Israel in the land, Amos 9, 14 and 15. Amos chapter 9, 14 and 15. Very important verses. God said, I'm going to put my people in their land in the last days, and they will remain there forever. So, put your money on Israel. They're not going anywhere. You have God's word on there. Once they're in the land, Amos 9, 14 and 15 says, they will be there forever. Now, the sad part of that, as I've said before, is that a lot of people are going to die trying to protect that land. And I'm sorry for that, genuinely sorry for that. So, anyway, the land is important and it belongs to God's people. Now, I want to talk about the Abrahamic covenant for just a moment. Now, the Abrahamic covenant, I'll read from Genesis chapter 12, beginning at verse 1. And I want you to understand this covenant, and the word covenant means a promise or agreement. So God made a promise to Abraham. He made an agreement with Abraham. And God said, this is what I will do. And so God repeats that same promise or covenant, Genesis 12, Genesis 13, 15, 17, 22. And not only did God make this promise to Abraham, but he renewed the promise with Abraham's son Isaac, and he renewed it with Isaac's son Jacob, and then he renewed it, as we see in 2 Samuel and the book of Psalms, and with the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, men like David, King David, and Solomon, and so on. So, Genesis 12:1. The Lord, again, if you have a Bible that has, you see, whenever you see the word Lord in all caps, that's Yahweh. That's God's personal name. So the Lord has said to Abram, and remember, God changed Abram's name to Abraham. So when we read Abram, same thing, same person. Leave your country. Remember, he was living back in Iraq, what we know as Iraq today. Your people and your father's household. Why do you want him to leave his father's household? Well, what did his father do for a living? What did I tell you? That's right. He made idols. You got to come out from these heathen people, even if it's a father or a mother. And he says, I want you to go to the land that I will show you. Now, what's the first thing in the Abrahamic covenant that God mentions? The land. The land is important. And by the way, you know, I've taken tours to Israel. I've taken a lot of people from this church and all Central Arkansas to Israel. Been over there 4 times. And I want to tell you something. When you get off that airplane and you get out there and step on that ground, I want to tell you something. You know it's different land. I mean, dirt's dirt. You know, and I learned that as I traveled the world. You know, I was, as I said a while ago, about 70 countries, and I was gone all the time. And I have seen some wonderful things and met some wonderful people and experienced some wonderful culture. But I want to tell you something. Of the 70 countries or whatever I've been in, there's one that feels different, and it's Israel. And they don't call it the Holy Land for nothing. Because you know when you step on that ground, that land is holy. It belongs to God. And God has given it to his people. And there's something special about that. So the first thing he mentions is the land. That's interesting. He goes on, and Yahweh says, I will make you, Abram, into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I'll make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Well, it's true, his name was great. Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Abraham plays an important part in all three of those major religions in the world. He says here in verse 3, and I, Yahweh, will bless those who bless you. So I'm going to bless Abraham, and by extension, the descendants of Abraham. I'll bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. Now I'm going to come back to that big time in about 15 minutes. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Again, how could that happen? The Messiah is a descendant from Abraham. He's in the Jewish lineage, Jesus Christ is, and it's through Jesus Christ all the nations of the world are blessed. Verse 7, the Lord, again, Yahweh, appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. Now he repeats himself, but the thing that he mentions is last is the thing that he mentioned first, the land. The land. It's important. So, in this covenant, this agreement that God made with Abram, he says, I'm going to make you a great nation. He says your descendants are going to number as the stars in the heavens. Have you ever wondered how many stars there are in the heavens? Well, the old timers in the 16th century, they'd lay on their backs at night and they'd count the stars. And they said there was about 1,200. Today, with things like the Hubble telescope and the newer ones, the number's about the same, not too much different, 200 billion. Yeah, quite a bit of difference, right? 1,200 to 200 billion. All right, so you get the point here. A lot of stars, a lot of descendants. Then he says, or as the grains of sand on the seashore. Have you ever thought about how many grains of sand there are in the seashores of the world? No, I haven't either, but I can tell you what scientists say there are. 7 quintillion, 5 quadrillion grains of sand. Okay, how big is that? The number 7 with 75 zeros following it. What's the point? The point is you have an uncountable number of stars, uncountable number of grains on the sand. The descendants of Israel are going to be an uncountable number. I'll make your name great. I mentioned about the 3 major world religions, revere him. I'll bless those who bless you and curse those. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. I told you early up front that was a reference, I get the right word, reference to Christ from Galatians chapter 3. And he says, I will give you and your descendants the land of Canaan. So that's what the Abrahamic covenant was all about. And as I said, it's in chapter 12, chapter 13, chapter 15, chapter 17, chapter 22. So God just keeps repeating this because he wants it to get into Abraham's mind. Now, the Abrahamic covenant is unconditional. Now, in the Bible, there are both conditional promises and unconditional promises. Now, I think we're all familiar with the Great Commission, where Jesus told his disciples to go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature, and to baptize them and teach them all things. Now, that part is a command, but it's a conditional promise. Because the next verse says, and lo, I shall be with you always. To have Christ's abiding presence always is conditioned upon us sharing the gospel. So it's a conditional promise. So is God with us at all times? Yes. Is God going to leave us? No. But God makes a special promise to us if we're obedient. That's a conditional promise. You do this, God says, I'll do that. That's not what happened with the Abrahamic covenant. God didn't say, if you do this, I'll do that. No. God says, I am going to do this. Period. And I deal with that in great detail in here, but I haven't got time today. But I want to mention Psalm 89. This this is quite a passage. Psalm 89:30, beginning at verse 30. If his, David's sons, forsake my law and do not follow my statutes. So if David's sons don't obey me, God says, if they violate my decrees and fail to keep my commands, I will punish their children. I'll punish their children's sin with the rod and their iniquity with flogging. But here's the key part. All right. If my children are disobedient, I'm going to discipline them, all right. But I will not take my love from him, the children of Israel, nor will I ever betray my faithfulness. The Old Testament has been summed up in a number of ways, but let me just put it this way. The Old Testament can be described as God's faithfulness to his people. If you study the Old Testament, you know that it is a roller coaster ride for the children of Israel concerning their spirituality and walk with God. And, they did some bad things. That's what the book of Judges is all about. It's about 7 cycles of sin and confession, repentance, 7 cycles of that. They just keep going over and over again. And, it's a picture of humanity. There's some days I'm closer to the Lord than I am on others. If you're honest, I think you'd say the same. And so, we're not special, we're not perfect, but God's children in the Old Testament, you see this constantly, these circles. And Israel had a real big problem. The Jews followed their kings. And if their kings were good, they were good. If their kings were evil, they were evil. And that got them in a whole lot of trouble. And there are 19 kings in Israel, the northern part of the nation, and not a single one of those 19 kings were good. Not a single one. And in the southern kingdom, Judah, there were 19 kings and 1 queen, and there was only a handful of those who were good. So that means if you have bad kings, you have bad people, and that was exactly the way it was. And so, they were not perfect. I'm not perfect either. I'm just being objective here, not condemning, okay? I'm just objectively saying that's what they did. I'm not saying judging them and saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying that. So he goes on here. He says, I'll not take my love from them, even though they're disobedient, nor will I ever betray my faithfulness. I will not violate my covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or alter what my lips have uttered. Does that sound like it's a conditional covenant or an unconditional one? Unconditional. So no matter how good Israel is or how bad Israel is, God's not going to take back the promises he made. Verse 35, once for all, I've sworn by my holiness, God says, and I will not lie to David, that David's line will continue forever, and his throne endure before me like the sun. It will be established forever like the moon, the faithful witness in the sky. Selah. Is the sun in the same place in the sky every day? Is the moon always in the sky every night? Now, if you can't see the sun, that doesn't mean it's not shining. If you can't see the moon, that doesn't mean it's not shining. It's always there. And God says, as long as that sun's shining in the daytime and that moon shining at night, that's how long my promise to Abraham is that I made to him. So the next time you look at the sun, you think about God's faithfulness with this covenant with Abraham and the Jewish people. The next time you look up at the moon at night, you think about God's faithfulness to his people. Of course, that's the same promise to you and me. Never will I leave thee, never will I forsake thee. It was a promise to believers, the writer of Hebrews says. Romans 11, 27 to 29. And Romans chapters 9, 10, and 11 are a description of how God's plan was to save the world through the preaching and the holy living of the Jewish people. But they didn't do it, and of course we know they rejected Christ as Messiah. So God says Israel's like a tree, and I've come in here and I've sawn off the limb called Judaism, and I've grafted in a new limb called the church, referring to us. And so God, now we are the light of the world. Now we are the salt of the earth. Now we are the vehicle by which God is taking the gospel to the world. But if you read those 3 chapters, you're going to find that God says, I will not forsake my people, and that there's coming a day when the Gentiles, believers, are going to be removed. I think that's rapture. And that then God's going to graft back in the Jews. And that's the purpose of the tribulation period. It's the salvation of the Jews. Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7, calls the time of the tribulation period Jacob's trouble. And who's Jacob? He's the son of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. That's the lineage. And God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. So Jacob and Israel are synonymous. So the tribulation period is the time of Israel's trouble. What's the purpose of the tribulation? Well, I got thinking on my prophecy notes, I probably have 4 or 5 things, purposes of the tribulation. But the main one is that the Jews might be saved. That they might, as I said a while ago, realize they rejected the Messiah, confess their sin, ask the Messiah to come. That's the purpose of the tribulation. And the day they do that, bang, Christ returns at the second coming, and it's over on earth as we know life. It's different from then on in with the millennium and then the eternal age. So, Romans 11, verse 27. And this is my covenant with them, meaning Israel, when I, the Lord, take away their sins. As far as the gospel is concerned, they, meaning Israel, are enemies on your account, Gentile believers. That's the context. But as far as election, $2 word for salvation, is concerned, they, Israel, are loved on account of the patriarchs. Well, who are the patriarchs? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, so on. For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. They cannot be withdrawn. God said that these promises that he made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are irrevocable. He'll never take them back. So, in my notes, I talk about the covenant being, Abrahamic covenant being given to Isaac and then to Jacob and so on, and that's what's important. Couple verses again, coming back to the land. Genesis 13:15. All the land that you see, Abraham, I will give to you and your offspring forever. Forever. In Genesis 17:8, the whole land of Canaan I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you. What kind of possession? Everlasting. You don't need to be a Hebrew scholar to understand that word. Everlasting. Let's see, there's so many verses here. I'm talking about a dozen or more. Here, Deuteronomy 4:40. Deuteronomy 4:40. He says that you may live long in the land the Lord your God gives you for all time. The land doesn't belong to Palestinians, belongs to God. Jeremiah 7:7. The land I gave your forefathers forever and ever. So, over and over again, he keeps saying that he gave this land to the children of Israel forever. And that means it still belongs to the Jews today. Genesis 25:17. I want to talk about Ishmael for a moment. You know, the problem in the Middle East today goes back to the sin of Abraham and Sarah. One of the 4 great sins in the history of the universe. Sin number 1, Lucifer rebelling against God. Sin number 2, Adam and Eve eating of the forbidden fruit. Sin number 3, Judas betraying Jesus Christ. Sin number 4, Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar having a child, trying to work out themselves the promise that the angel of the Lord in Genesis 18 gave to Abraham when he said, "This time next year I shall return and Sarah will be with child." Excuse me. So Ishmael was conceived by Abraham and Sarah's maid Hagar. They were trying to help God out. I've gotten in trouble every time I've tried to help God out. And so did Abraham and Sarah. And so they conceived, and Hagar conceived. She had a child. She was told by the angel to name him Ishmael, and she did do that. Genesis 25:17 talks about Ishmael here. Ishmael's descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur, near the border of Egypt as you go toward Ashur. And they, these Ishmaelites, lived in hostility toward all their brothers. Folks, where Ishmael settled in the beginning is the area of the Gaza Strip. And gone very far. That's Gaza Strip today, that very area there. You know, the Arabs can't even get along with each other, you know, and the Bible talks about that in Scripture, and history of just reading a little history, you see they can't get along, and even God said that Ishmael would be a donkey of a man. Well, you know what a donkey is. He's stubborn, right? Don't we use that? We use different animals to describe different characteristics. Wise as an owl, sly as a, there you go, stubborn as a donkey. So we do that. We use animals to illustrate characteristics in people, some good, some bad, but they can't even get along with each other. And a good example of that is the 8-year war between Iraq and Iran, 1980 to 1988. Some of you might remember that. For some of you, I know you're too young to remember that, but there was a war. Saddam Hussein in Iraq, he attacked Iran. 8-year war. Depleted his treasury from fighting that war. That's why Saddam Hussein, in August of 1990, invaded Kuwait to take those oil fields so that he could have that oil money to replenish his treasury. Now also, of course, Saddam Hussein was in this elaborate building program. And someday I probably need to talk to you about how God used Saddam Hussein to rebuild Babylon. And I believe the Antichrist will have his headquarters, his economic and political headquarters in Babylon, his religious headquarters in Jerusalem. And he rebuilt the Hanging Gardens, rebuilt the temple there, the walls, all of that, all rebuilt. The city's called Havilah today. It's about 50 miles south of Baghdad. And that's where we think that he will set up his economic kingdom from there. So I want to talk for a moment here. The real issue in the Middle East is the land. The Muslims have a strange belief that if they've ever owned anything, it belongs to them forever. Well, that might be an all right thing. Let me see, I've owned about 10 houses in my life. I'd like to have them all back, you know. Properties, values have gone way up. Is that ethical? No, it's not going to happen. But they have that belief. So they say, well, we once owned this land, so therefore it still belongs to us. Of course, now they're saying that they own the area in New York City where the Twin Towers were, and Washington, D.C., where the Pentagon is. Why? Well, those Muslims shot those buildings down now. They were there, so they're there. They own it. Good luck with that in court. But that's what they do. But they don't understand that the Jews were in that land 1,500 years before Muhammad and Islam began. You know, if you can get that to work out for you, more power to you, but I don't think you're going to get what somebody owned 1,500 years before you ever came on this planet and say it's yours. No, but that's what they do. That's what they do. So our time is gone. You haven't really listened fast enough. You need to do better on that. It would be helpful. But I want to get down to, that won't take me 5 minutes to finish. Well, that's a lie. It might take me 10 minutes. I want to talk about a verse of scripture from Obadiah. Now, you don't read Obadiah every day, I know. And the preacher doesn't ever quote from Obadiah, but I'm going to. Obadiah, first chapter there, verse 15. The day of the Lord. Now that in the Old Testament refers to the tribulation period, the 7-year tribulation period after the rapture. Is near for all nations. Well, if it was near 2,400 years ago, 2,500 years ago, then it's really near today, right? As you have done to Israel, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head. So God is saying in this book about judgment, and the minor prophets are generally about God's judging sin. He said, as anybody has done to my people Israel, it will be done to them. So again, when I started, I said Israel was God's treasured possession. So coming back to Genesis chapter 12, in the first 3 verses, God says that if you bless Israel, you will be blessed, and whosoever curses Israel, God himself will curse. That is what scares me as an American. Because every time that a nation broke the Abrahamic covenant, God destroyed the nation. Think about Egypt for a minute. Okay? What happened to Egypt? Well, Moses left them very much struggling, took a lot of their wealth. That's how God built the portable house of worship, the tabernacle. What about Spain? You heard of the Inquisition, where they not only tried Jewish people, but they executed Jewish people. The Edict of Expulsion. What happened to Spain? Well, you don't hear Spain in the news too much, do you? She's not a power today because she broke the Abrahamic covenant. What about Great Britain? You know, at the beginning of the 20th century, Great Britain said the sun never sets on the British Empire. I'm telling you, from the mid-60s on, all of these countries that Britain was over, not all of them, but most of them, they left British rule. And now there's still 5 or 6, but there was many times more than that at the beginning. And why? Because Great Britain broke the Abrahamic covenant. And I talk about that during World War II and how the British blockaded the land of Israel and kept the Jews in Europe from escaping Nazism and going to Palestine, and how they forced them to go back to Europe. And many of them went into Hitler's ovens. And they not did it once, they did it many times. And now Great Britain's a third-rate nation, and you wouldn't even hear about them except a lot of our people came from there originally, and they have a bomb. They're in the nuclear club. Germany, Adolf Hitler trying to effect the final solution to the Jewish problem. What happened to him? This is kind of interesting, what an advisor to General Dwight D. Eisenhower said after World War II. He said, everything which modern man considers necessary to the maintenance of life in a civilized society has disappeared in Germany. There's no government authority, no police, no trains or cars, no factories working, no postal service, no telephones, no newspapers, no banks. No shop was open, and it would have been impossible to buy a loaf of bread, a glass of beer, or an aspirin. They broke the Abrahamic covenant, and God broke them. Well, that brings us to America. And I'm here to tell you that I have a little more than 60 events in the notes where America, particularly American presidents, forced Israel to give up the land for peace, and within 3 days, God sent a major judgment upon America. And I've got over 60 of these. And I suppose I could keep working on it. That takes a lot of time and research. But I'm just going to give you one, and if you want the notes, then you can get them. You know, if one or two times this happened and then this happened, they might say coincidence. But when I've got 60 events where this happened and this happened, it's not coincidence. So let me share with you about this. And in the notes, you know, I talk about Republicans and Democrats. I think one of the things that's frustrated me in the ministry is that I meet people all the time that are more concerned about political parties than they are about truth. And I deal in truth. And I'll tell you what, Republicans are sorry, the Democrats are sorry, and the independents are sorry. I want them all gone. I'm mad at them all.
Start your new campaign. If they're in, you're out.
That's mine.
That's what you said.
I know. That's right. I came up with the campaign. If you're in, you're out. If you're in office, I want you out.
Amen.
Where else can you go to work? For a senator, U.S. senator makes $174,000 a year. Where else can you go to work, make that little amount of money, living in the most expensive city in America, and you go in there, you might be upper middle class or maybe in the lower ends of the upper class, and come out millionaires, many fold over. Now, how does that happen? Yeah, we know how it happens. So, in here I talk about Republican presidents, I talk about Democratic presidents, they're all guilty. So forget the party thing. That really bugs me. I'm sorry, but it does. And that's not it. I'm dealing with truth. Okay, so let's talk about, I'll just do a Republican. October 30th, 1991. Now the Gulf War started, remember, January 18th or 19th, 1991. Remember that? Interesting enough, I was doing a prophecy conference that week, and that night, here comes all of this, you know, and it was kind of a strange timing. President George H.W. Bush, that's 41, the old man, called for peace talks involving Israel, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, and Israel. President George H.W. Bush opened the Madrid peace talks, that was from October 30th to November 1st, 1991, with a speech in which he said, and I quote, "We believe territorial land compromised by Israel is essential for peace. In other words, the only way we're going to have peace in Israel is if Israel gives up her land." That's what he said. Exactly what he said. That very day that he said that, Israel must give up her land. October 30th, 1991. A powerful storm developed off the coast of Nova Scotia. Now, if you're a little short on geography, Bush's home, the Bush compound in Kennebunkport, Maine, and Nova Scotia is an island just above Maine. Okay? The National Weather Bureau was completely caught by surprise. This was not anticipated. This is a kind of weather pattern that happens only once every 100 years. The official name for this hurricane was Grace, but the National Weather Service later renamed it the Perfect Storm. Y'all, anybody remember the Perfect Storm? You read the book, see the movie, the story of the ship, Andrea Gale. All right. This storm smashed into New England, creating waves over 100 feet high, which were the highest ever recorded in history. Waves as high as 30 feet smashed the president's home that very day. The president's land was touched by God on the very day he asked Israel to give up her land. Once every 100-year storm, 30-foot high waves hit his house. 60 some of these, including Katrina including the Joplin tornado that went over my house, literally right over my house, and set down on the east side of my house. Every time we're forcing Israel to give up her land, America is. And when we do, God sends a judgment. So that's called, as ye have done unto Israel. Zechariah 2:8, I close. For this is what the Lord Almighty says. After he, Yahweh, has honored me and sent me against the nations that have plundered you, the nation of Israel. God says, I'm going to come in judgment upon the nations that have plundered the land of Israel. Now again, Zechariah speaks about the end times, speaks about the tribulation period. He says, for whoever touches you, the nation of Israel, touches the apple of God's eye. Don't touch it. Leave it alone. And my advice to President Biden or President whomever, leave Israel alone. Stand with Israel, support Israel. I don't agree with everything Israel does, but I sure am afraid that America is going to be destroyed because we have broken the Abrahamic covenant.